Hello everyone, I'm International Master Okeke Isaac, and this is Ladder Chess. So Ladder is a chess learning platform for beginners. It helps beginners to get better at chess, improve their chess skills. So in this video today we'll be going through several lessons, and the purpose of this video is to enable you to get acquainted. So for most of you that have been struggling with your play, trying to improve your play, thinking how you can do it, too much books, too much of everything. It's very hard to find what is working because there's just too much of everything. The information overload is too much, and that's why we built Ladder. So one of the first things you notice is the structure. So this particular program here is mainly for people between level 1, mostly 0 Elo to 1050 Elo, but it's also good for any other person that is trying to refresh their foundations, to master the foundations of the game itself. So for instance, we had somebody that is a 2-2 player that used it as well, and he became victorious, got his international master title as well. Because one of the major things about going back to the foundations is that it helps you to refine your knowledge of the most important things of the game itself. It helps you to freshen some certain knowledge that you can build upon over time. So here we have the sections and the units. So when you're starting out, one of the first things you will see is the units and sections. So for this particular video, we are just going to go into a couple of units, especially for those that are just starting out in chess. Then over time, probably in subsequent videos, we'll look at exploring other sections too as well. So let's get into it, starting out with the introduction to chess. Alright, so probably a lot of you are not aware that chess began in India. Well, historical evidence and archaeologists, etc., refer to India as the birthplace for where the modern idea of chess started from itself. Before it was named as Chaturanga, meaning I don't know what it means, but yeah, it was named as Chaturanga. Then over time became known as chess. So let's continue. Alright, so chess was created to model war. So the rumor behind the creation of the game was that a young Gupta Empire prince back then wanted to tell a story to his mother about how her son, his brother, was killed. So he tried to represent that story in I think it was more than 8 times 8 grid board. But that was how the foundations actually started, him trying to represent the story of what happened in the battle and using pieces and a board to represent that particular moment. So chess is created to model war. That's why you notice the kings, the queens, you have rooks, you have pawns, you have a board itself that is meant to mimic a road where the soldiers pass through to go and do battle, or the terrain basically. And let's continue. So at the same time, travel and trade also made chess very popular, because as people trade, as different cultures, different societies traded with themselves, from Persia down to Asia, from Asia down to Persia, down to Europe. These merchants that were trading with themselves, as they exchange goods and services as well, they also as they were exchanging these things, they also brought chess too, because it was a game. It's a game itself. So most humans we love games basically. And that was how the game spread to Europe eventually. So it was in Europe that chess took on its modern form, the modern chess as we know it today. So let's continue. Also, kings and queens love chess too as well. Initially, the game was known as a game for royalties, specifically designed for royalties. But over time, it became to known as a game for everyone, because it wasn't limited. You aren't limited to anything per se. As much as you have a brain, you can think, you can say, you can move. If you can think, you can move. you can visualize things, you can play chess. Let's continue. Also, chess grows your mind basically. So chess is a very good game that helps you to improve the way you think, the way you think of several options, the way you make decisions. Basically, you become someone that becomes much intentional in how you make decisions. You try to see your options available. You try to see 2 or 3 moves ahead. What can happen if you go down that path? What can happen if you do this? What can happen if you do that? So you tend to make better quality decisions across different aspects of life. All right, let's continue. So today everyone loves chess. There are over 500 million people across the world that play chess today. So it's a very good game that a lot of people across the world are adopting, and it's spreading rapidly. It's growing rapidly. Let's continue. Also, like we said, chess makes you powerful, improves your ability to make quality decisions. Alright, so this is an exercise. Probably you can pause the video while you are watching to answer this. But we all know this is India. Okay, so check it. Continue. Okay, so what does chess model? As we all know it, chess models war. Okay. Alright, nice. Alright, so chess is also played on a board. As you can see here, there's a board. It's 8 times 8 squares, making 64 squares in total between a white player and a black player. So it's a turn-by-turn strategy game. It's much fun when you have somebody by your side to play with. Let's continue. White always plays first too, as well, like we see here. So white begins the game. So when we mean a turn-by-turn game, so what that means is when you make your move, your opponent also makes his own move. Alright, let's continue. Then black plays next after white move. Like I said before, it's a turn-by-turn game. So when you make your move, you have to wait for black to play before you making your move next as white, if you're a white player. Okay, so how many white squares are on the board? Like we said, there are 64 squares in total. There are 64 squares in total, white and black squares. So if there are white and black squares having 64 squares, how many white squares would be on the board? You can pause the video, but it's 32. Okay, so for future exercises, so whenever there is an exercise in front, you can always pause the video to think about the solution before continuing the video. So here, match the correct pair. So we always know that white plays first, then black plays second. Okay, so there are 6 pieces in chess as well. As we know, the king is the most important piece of the game, because in chess the whole objective is centered around trying to capture that king. So if you capture your opponent's king, you win the game. Then we also have the queen. It's like the advisor to the king. As much as the king is the most important piece on the chessboard, the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard too as well. I know that might sound strange for some of you, but that's like a balance of power between the pieces. Then we also have the bishop. The bishop is also it's an officer piece too as well. Also one of the major pieces in chess. Then we have the knight. It looks like a horse, but its name is a knight, so we know it as a knight. Then we have the rook, also known as a castle in chess, because it looks like medieval castles. Castles back then during the 1400s, 1500s, 1300s, and so on and so forth. But in chess we know it as a rook. And we have the little one known as the pawn. So these are the pawn was created to mimic frontline soldiers, because we know that frontline soldiers are usually more than the officers, that direct them and guide them on the actual path to move to navigate towards. So then, how do you set up a chessboard? How do you set up a chessboard? So there's a song that that helps you to remember how to set up the chessboard very fast, and the song goes rook, knight, bishop. So firstly, the first thing we need to know is that in the chessboard, the second row for where white is staying and for where black is sitting at is where the pawns are usually situated at. So all the pawns, there are 8 pawns in total. So we always keep each and every one of those pawns in the individual squares along that second row. The same thing goes for the black pawns too as well. We keep all the oak pawns along the second row. Then for the officers, they are placed beneath the pawns row. So we have the rook, knight, bishop. To the left again, rook, knight, bishop. Then you have the king and queen together, and the pawns at the front, as we said before. We could go again. Rook, knight, bishop, rook, knight, bishop, king and queen together, pawns at the front. Rook, knight, bishop, rook, knight, bishop, king and queen together, then pawns at the front. Yeah, that is the song. Okay, so let's continue. Alright, so this is an exercise to arrange the chessboard. So let's get into it. As we said before, so firstly we remember the pawns are the ones kept in the front. So let's put the pawns, each and every one of the pawns in the front. So pawns in the front. Yes. So we remember the song, rook, knight, bishop. Then to the left again, rook, knight, bishop. Now remember, king and queen together. Then pawns at the front. So let's do the same thing for the black side. Let's put the pawns, all the black pawns in the front. So remember, 8 pawns in total for both sides. White has 8 pawns and black has 8 pawns each. So we've placed all the black pawns in the front on the second row for black side. So now let's place the officers too as well. So let's remember the song again. Rook, knight, bishop. Rook, knight, bishop. Then king and queen together, then pawns at the front. Okay, so we've arranged the chessboard. So now let's check if our answer is correct. Very good. So let's continue. Alright, so which one is the bishop? Yeah, this. So select this. Correct. Alright, very good, very good. Alright, let's continue. So now we're going to match the correct pieces with the name. So this one, we know it has the bishop. So we are going to match it with the bishop. We know this has the queen. So we are going to match it with the queen. We know this has the knight. So we are going to match it with the knight. We know this has the rook. So where is the rook? Okay, up here. We're going to match it with the rook. We know this has the king. We're going to match it with the king. And the last one, but not the least, the pawn. Very good. If you got that correct, you can clap for yourself. Alright, so which board setup is correct? Which board setup is correct? Is it the one by the left or the one by the right? First thing we need to notice is what are the differences. We can see here that the major difference is the bishop comes after the rook. then the knight. And while in the A side, we have the knight first and the bishop. And remember in the song, in the song that we did before, we said rook, knight, bishop to the left. Again, rook, knight, bishop, king and queen together, pawns at the front. Again, rook, knight, bishop, rook, knight, bishop, king and queen together, pawns at the front. And yet we have rook, bishop, knight. So it doesn't sound well. So we know that A is correct. So select A. So how many pieces does white have? So remember there are 8 pawns in total. And beneath those pawns, there are also 8 pieces. So 8 plus 8 is 16. So we know 16 is correct. White has 16 pieces and black also has 16 pieces. So we continue. So here is another exercise to arrange the board. So let's quickly do it. Pawns on the first row, on the second row, sorry. On the second row. So we know we have rook, knight, bishop to add. Rook, knight, bishop. Rook, knight, so a bishop is missing here. Okay, not the black bishop, the white. So at the back again, the same thing. Rook, knight, bishop. To the left side, rook, knight, bishop. Then king and queen together. And the pawns at the front. So we have the missing pawns in the front now. Alright, correct. Very good. So who plays first? Remember in the previous exercises, we know that chess is a turn-by-turn game and white always plays first. So we select white here. Alright, so another exercise to arrange the chessboard. So this gets you familiar with how to arrange a chessboard. So whenever you are playing in a tournament or an individual game with your friend or family, whichever person you are playing with, if there is a mistake in the arrangement of the pieces, you can easily tell. Alright, so we know rook, knight, bishop, so let's add that. Rook, knight, bishop. To the left, rook, knight, bishop. King and queen together, so a queen is missing in this square. Then for the black pieces, the same thing. Rook, knight, bishop. To the left, rook, knight, bishop, king and queen together, then pawns at the front. So we have one more pawn missing. So we add it. Check answer. Very good. So I say which piece is the king? So we know the piece here is the king. This is the queen, bishop, and rook. If you've gotten some of the answers correctly up to this point, you are doing well. Alright, so how many pieces does a chessboard have? Can you answer this one? So we know white has 16 pieces and black has 16 pieces. So that's 32 in total. Very good. How many squares does a chessboard have? So squares are different from pieces. So we know there are 64 squares on the chessboard. 8 times 8, 64. So continue. So another exercise. So let's go with the song again. Rook, knight, bishop. To the left, rook, knight, bishop. King and queen together, then pawns at the front. Pawns at the front. Alright, so 8 pawns in total on the second row. And the same thing for the black side. So rook, knight, bishop, rook, knight, bishop, king and queen together, then pawns at the front. So we have the remaining pawns. So the second row for black. Alright, so that is good. So by now, most of you should be familiar with how to arrange the chess pieces on the board. Okay, so that's with the first minute. So we are done. We've seen how to move the pieces, what chess is, and how to arrange the chessboard too as well. So let's go into the second unit now. So in this unit, we are going to be looking at how the pieces move. How the pieces move. I'm sure most of you know this lady as Bet Amon from the Queen's Gambit. Alright, let's continue. Alright, so the pawn is the smallest piece on the chessboard as we know it. Like I said in the previous time, that they are made to mimic frontline soldiers, because we know that frontline soldiers are usually more than the officers in charge. And that's why we have more pawns than officers. You know, the highest number of officers we have on the chessboard are 2. At most is 2. And we have 8 pawns. So let's continue. So how does the pawn move? So the pawn moves in a straight line along the squares. So remember I said the chessboard itself is like a road where the pieces are moving alongside that road. So the way the rules work is that a particular piece has squares it can move based on its movement, and as it moves along those squares, that's how it does throughout the rest of the game and the subsequent games. So the pawn, for instance, it moves whenever it's still at the initial square on the second row. It can move either two squares forward or just 1 square. So here we can either move it 1 square or we can move it 2 square. So here it says move the pawn to the end of the board. So we are going to do that shortly. And one other thing to remember is that the pawn only moves forward. It can never go backward. It keeps moving forward, forward, forward. So let's continue. Pawn, pawn, pawn. Also, one more thing. The beauty of the pawn again is that whenever it gets to the end of the board, the last square on the end of the board, it can become either a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. But it cannot become a king, because you can't have 2 kings on one side. And it doesn't remain a pawn again. So it gets promoted to all those pieces, depending on your choice. So here we are going to choose a queen. Okay, so let's continue. Then how do pawns capture? So pawns capture diagonally. So remember, as we said, whenever you are moving the pieces, the pawns forward, you can move at the initial square. You can either move 2 squares or 1 square. And when you move them beyond the initial square, you can't move 2 squares forward again. You only keep moving 1 square. So whenever you have an opponent's piece to its diagonal, like we see in this particular position, the pawn can capture that piece. So for instance, here we have the pawn on this particular square. We also have a black piece, a black pawn too as well on this square. You can see it's next to its diagonal. It's facing the pawn's diagonal. So the white pawn can go ahead to capture the black pawn like this. Very good. So here it is black's turn to play, and we can see the white pawn is on the black diagonal, the black's pawn diagonal. So as we saw in the previous exercise, the black pawn can go ahead to capture the white pawn. So this goes ahead to even other pieces. If you have any other pieces in front of the pawn's diagonal, the pawn can actually capture that piece. Like you see here, so let's continue. Captures. So how about en passant? I know I saw a video recently on Instagram where one guy was arguing that he hasn't heard of en passant. So in this video we're going to look at what an en passant is. So en passant is a special pawn move. So what that means is that whenever your opponent moves his pawn 2 steps forward from the second row facing your pawn, you can capture it to its diagonal, as we see here. Why was the rule made? I don't know. I wasn't alive when they made that rule, but we were born into knowing that, you know, whenever the pawn advances 2 squares forward from its second row, if it's facing a pawn to his left, that pawn can actually capture it. So as you see here, pawn can capture it to his diagonal. So you remove the white pawn and you place your pawn on that square. So that is the en passant move. So here we need to get the white pawn towards the end of the board. So remember, as we said, if the pawn can only advance 2 squares forward whenever it's still in its initial square on the second row. After advancing 2 squares forward, you can only keep moving 1 square. And you can't move to your diagonal, because that's only when you need to capture a piece that is present on that diagonal square. But if those options are not available, you just know that you just keep moving forward. The pawn keeps moving forward 1 square at a time. As we see here, 1 square, and it goes to a queen. And remember, at the end, when it gets to the last end of the board, it gets promoted to a queen or a knight or a bishop or a rook. But it doesn't remain a pawn again, and you can't promote to a king too as well. So the same thing applies for black too. So if it's black pieces too, whenever black's pawn reaches to the last square on white's territory, it can get promoted to either a queen, as we saw earlier. Let's continue. Yeah. So in chess, remember I said white has 2 bishops. So black also has 2 bishops. But there's a difference in how this bishop moves. So one of the core things you need to be aware of is that one bishop is always placed on a dark square, while his sibling, his twin basically, the other bishop is placed on a white square. So what that means is that the bishop on a light square would always move on light squares throughout the game, while the bishop on the dark square would always move on those dark squares throughout the game. So you cannot move a bishop from a dark square to a white square. That is not possible. And the same thing goes for the bishop on the light square. You can't move it to a dark square too. The same thing applies for the black bishops too. So let's continue. And the bishop only moves on diagonals in an X shape. So remember we said the board itself is used to represent a road. And each of the pieces move along the road in a certain way. So it's just, for instance, like your car or any vehicle itself. Your car can't move diagonally. It's not possible. You have to, if you are turning it can't keep moving diagonally. So, but the bishop, the way the bishop moves along those squares, it moves in a diagonal way along those squares. Remember, an X shape. The bishop moves in an X shape, X shape. So if it's the light square bishop, you can see here in this particular image, bishop moving along those light squares, and it can go far range too. So it's not limited to moving just on one square, provided that those squares are not being blocked by another piece or its pieces. It means that the bishop can move far range along those squares. Let's continue. So here the exercise says we need to capture all the black pawns. So remember we said bishop moves in an X shape, and we have the light square bishop here. So we are going to start capturing all the black pawns. Take this one, take this one, take this one, and take this one. Yeah, very good. So now we need to capture the white pawns. So here you can see that firstly this pawn is in front, so you can't just capture this one immediately because your bishop cannot jump over a piece. Almost all the old chess pieces, they can't jump over a piece. The only piece that can jump over a piece is the knight. We'll see it in the subsequent lesson. But remember that your bishop or any of your pieces can't jump over a piece to go and capture a piece at the back of it. So here we have to go through it one by one. So here we capture this pawn, capture this pawn, capture this one, and take the last one. So let's continue. So yeah, this is a very good example of what I was trying to talk about. So this black pawn is in front of the diagonal of this particular white pawn. If it were here, we know that the pawn will simply have captured it, but there's a square between them. But this is a good work for the bishop. So what's the best way for the bishop to capture the black pawn fast? We know we can't jump over our pawn. That is not possible. So the best thing to do is we can move the pawn forward, giving the bishop a breathing room. So now capture the black pawn. Very good. Let's continue. Yeah, then another thing to also remember is that you cannot capture your own piece. So if you are white, you can't capture a white piece. If you are black, you cannot capture a black piece. You can only capture your opponent's piece. Although you can sacrifice your pieces though. Let's continue. Alright. Next. Okay, so the rook. So here it's a rocky piece. Remember I said the rook was created to mimic a castle. And the rook moves in a plus shape. So you know how we say plus. Moves in a plus shape. Like you can see here. Addition, basically. Addition. So whenever it's moving along the chessboard squares, it only moves along those squares in a plus shape, in a plus form. Alright, let's continue. So here now we are going to be moving the rook in a plus shape to go and capture all these black pieces. So we're going to take this one, take this one, take this one, and capture the last one. Very good. So here, this is also another very good example. The rook cannot jump over its own piece. That's not possible. So we need to go around to figure out how we can go and capture this white pawn here. So here I'm going to move here, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to take this. So here the same thing goes, we need to capture the black pieces here. Take this, take this, take this, and you'll notice how I'm moving the rook in a plus shape along those squares. As you can see, denoted by these circle squares, it shows where the rook, where the rook can go to capture the bishop. Yes, very good, very good. Okay, so then the king. Remember, as we said, the main objective of chess is to checkmate your king, your opponent's king. So when you checkmate basically means you capture the king. It is unable to move. You put it in a position where it is unable to move and it is being attacked. So and it can't go anywhere. You can't capture the piece that is threatening it. So when you have such movements occur in a game, what that means is that the opponent's king that has just been checkmated has lost the game. So that's why the king is very important, because you can have so much pieces, but if your king gets checkmated, you lose the game. You lose the game. Let's continue. So how does the king move? The king moves he moves one square at a time to any of the squares that is close to it. So either in a plus shape or a diagonal. But it can't move long ranges that is more than more than one square at a time. It can only move one square at a time. Can't move more than one square at a time. So let's get the king to the end of the board. So we're moving it. So notice how I can move it both diagonally and in plus shape, but I can't move it beyond one square. Yeah. So we've gotten the king to the end of the board. Now we want to capture the black pawn. So we get the king towards where the black pawn is, and the pawn is in its front. So now we can capture the black pawn in front. Let's continue. Yeah, so another important thing to be aware of is that a king cannot capture a protected piece. So what that means is that whenever your opponent's piece is protecting, so let us see an example of that. Okay. So we are going to see an example of that shortly. So here, the bishop is attacking white's king. Because as we can see, remember that the bishop moves in an X shape and it can move long diagonals across long ranges, so more than one square at a time. So we can see here that the bishop is hitting the white king along that diagonal. So you need to move the king. So because the king is under attack, the king needs to be moved away. Assuming you had a piece that could capture that bishop, you simply would have captured the bishop. Because there are no other white pieces that can capture the black bishop, you simply just need to move the king away. So here I'm going to sidestep my king, take it to any square. Okay. Okay, so here is also a very good example. We have the white rook. Remember, the rook moves in a plus shape. So along this plus shape here, along the horizontal, the vertical row, along the vertical squares, you can see that it is hitting this black king on this square here. So the black king either needs to move away, but because there is also this bishop by the side, and notice how the bishop is moving along those long diagonals, and the rook is at the end of the diagonal where the bishop is facing. So that means rather than just moving your king, if you have the opportunity to grab your opponent's piece, you simply just take it. So now the bishop is going to capture the white rook, and black is doing very fine. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so yeah, we all know the queen, as I said in earlier lessons, that the queen is a very powerful piece. As compared to the king is the most important piece, but the queen is very powerful, the most powerful piece on the chessboard, because of our abilities, our ability to move like multiple pieces. So let us see how the queen can move. So the queen can move in a plus shape and a diagonal shape. So what that means, as we see, so she can move like the rook, and she can move like the bishop, and she can move like the king, and she can move like the pawn too as well. So we are going to be capturing all the white pieces here, moving the rook, queen across the board. So we're going to capture the rook first, so we can notice how we can move in a plus shape or a diagonal shape across more than one square. So as opposed to the king that just moves on one square at a time and can't move more than one square, but the queen can move more than one square across those sides. So we're going to capture the rook first. So we're going to come here, come closer to where the pawn is. We're going to capture it. So this pawn is here. We need to get the queen closer to where it is, so we can be able to capture it. Or we need to put it along either the row or the column, so we can be able to capture the pawn. So we're going to put it here, and we're going to capture it. Very good. So we need to capture the rook with the queen, not with the bishop, because that's what the instruction says. So we need to move the bishop away first. Then we use our queen to capture it. Very good. So now we need to capture all the white pieces with the queen. We're going to take the rook first, come here again, take the pawn, come here again, and take the last pawn. Okay, so now most of you should know how the queen moves. Alright, so let's look at how the knight moves. So they say mostly the knight is the most difficult piece for most beginners to comprehend initially, but it's not that difficult. We're going to see how it can move shortly. So the knight jumps like a frog. So the knight is the only piece on the chessboard that can actually jump across pieces, as opposed to the other pieces that can't jump across a piece. So what that means, we're going to see what that means. So the knight moves in an L or T shape. So what that means is that wherever the knight is positioned, you simply are going to count two squares, like a plus form, two squares in a plus form, either to your left, to your right, up or down. So what I mean, I place the knight in a T shape. So what that means, for instance, is that if I count two squares upward, left or right, you can see the T or L, and I capture that pawn by the right, sorry. So again, we're going to count two squares to our left and L or T. So two squares to the left, L or T, you can see this. So that means when you count two squares to the left, you can move L or T to the one square to either the left or the right side. So we're going to capture this pawn here. And we're going to count 2 squares again. So now we want the pawn is beneath the knight. So we are going to count 2 squares down, L or T. 2 squares down, L or T, and we are going to capture this pawn here. This pawn is also here. So 2 squares down again, L or T. We are now coming to this. So knight takes pawn and L or T again. So remember, whenever we are moving the knight, we count 2 squares either in any of the plus shape, so in the addition symbol. So we count 2 squares up or to the side, to the left or down. So we count 2 steps forward, L or T, move the knight there, and capture the last pawn. So now we've seen how the knight moves. I think there are still some other exercises too as well. So first, touch the knight again. So remember how the knight moves. If we are going forward, to the left, to the right, or downwards. So if we are moving to our left or to the top, basically we count 2 squares up again, L or T, and we capture the bishop. Because it says we should capture the bishop, so take the bishop. Okay, so this particular exercise says we should capture the black knight. So let's take the black knight. So where's the black knight? The black knight is here, and we capture the black knight. Remember, L or T. Yes. Okay. So let's continue. So here it says castling helps to protect the king. And we remember that the king is the most important piece on the chessboard. So when you castle, what you simply do is you get to protect the king from the hot, heated, tension of the battle that is happening at that moment. So you protect your king, you prevent him from getting attacked or hit by the opponent's pieces. And we'll see some examples of kings that get stuck in the center, who don't castle. How do you actually castle in a game? Alright, let's continue. So how does castling work? You can see here white has moved his bishop and moves the king towards the right. So whenever you want to castle, the space between the king and the rook has to be devoid of pieces. There should be no pieces there. So in that moment, you just simply take your king 2 steps, count 2 steps, you move your king 2 steps to the right, and then you bring the rook to the left side of the king. So castling is the only time where we get to move 2 pieces at the same time. That's the only time when we get to move 2 pieces at the same time on the chessboard. So we can see it one more time again. You count 2 squares to your right, 1, 2, and you place the king on that square and take the rook that was on the right side of the king to the left. Alright, very good. So let's continue. Yeah, now we want to castle the white king. So one other important thing we also need to be aware of is that, remember earlier on we said the chessboard mimics a road where the pieces pass through. It's the battlefield. So it symbolizes the road, the terrain where the pieces are moving through. And on the chessboard, we have what we call the king side, where the king is situated at. The side by its right, that area is known as the king side. To the left, where the queen is situated at, that particular area is known as the queen side. The same thing for the black king too as well, and the black queen. The green side, as we can see the color here. So it says we should castle the white king. Let's remember that whenever castling is the only time where we get to move 2 pieces at the same time. So we count 2 squares to the right for the king, and then we switch the rook towards the left side of the king. Alright, very good. Let's continue. So yeah, what's the queen side and what's the king side and the queen side? Like I said earlier on, the king side is where the king is situated at. That area, the piece is placed at the squares very close to the king side. That's what we know as the king side, and the place near where the queen is situated at, we know that side as the queen side. Same thing for black too. So the green area here is known as the king side. The red area that is highlighted here is known as the queen side. Alright, let's continue. So in this position now, we've seen the king castling to the king's side. Sorry. Now I want to see how the king can castle to the queen's side. It's still the same thing, although the only difference is that instead of moving to the right to the king's side, now we are going to be moving to the left towards the queen's side. So now the queen is in place. Remember that whenever you want to castle, the squares between the king and the rook, and there should be no piece between them. So now the queen is between the king and the rook, so we need to move the queen away. So here we're going to place the queen on e2. Black castles to the king's side. Now we are going to castle our king towards the queen's side. All right, very good. Let's continue. Okay, yeah. So it says castle black's king to the king's side. So yeah, obviously remember that whenever there's a piece between the king and the rook, we can't castle, and the knight is blocking the both of them. So we need to take the knight away. So here we put the knight on f6. White moves, and yeah, we get to castle the king. Very good. So now it says castle the white king. So yeah, there are no pieces blocking the king and the rook. So here we move our king to castle immediately. Very good. Okay. Let's continue. Begin. Alright, so we've seen how all the old chess pieces move, from the king to the knight to the queen to the bishop to the pawns. You see now each and every one of those pieces move. So whenever you are playing, you know how to move your piece, you know how the knight moves, so you won't make mistakes. You also know how to set up the chessboard. You also see a bit of history where, you know, how chess started as a game itself. So yeah, let us see how some of these pieces, how you get to capture. We've seen examples of how to capture with pieces, but we'll see more additional examples too as well. So whenever you are playing, you don't make mistakes when you need to capture a piece. So yeah, it says capture the white pawn. Remember that whenever there is a pawn, pawns only capture to the diagonal. So whenever there's a pawn next to the diagonal of your piece, if it's your opponent's piece that is close to your pawn's diagonal, you can capture that piece. So here we capture the pawn. Alright, very good. Okay, so here it says capture white knight with the black pawn. And where is the black pawn that can capture the white knight? It's the one on right here. So we're going to click on it and capture the white knight. Okay, so it says capture the white knight. Where is the white knight that needs to be captured? You can see this particular white knight, you can't capture it, so but we have this one here that we can capture. So we're going to capture it with this. The reason why we don't use this other pawn is that if we use this particular pawn to capture the knight, we leave this pawn vulnerable for white's queen to be able to capture it there. So let's continue. It says capture the white pawn. The only white pawn that can be captured here is the one on d5. So we use the pawn and capture it. Continue. So yeah, we remember the en passant move again, where if a pawn advances 2 squares forward and is facing an opponent's pawn towards the left or right, it can be captured. So here we simply just capture the white pawn. Alright, so we've seen examples of how pawn captures the game. So whenever you are playing and you have your opponent's piece or pawn in front of you, you know how to simply just capture them to the diagonal. So let's continue. So yeah, we are going to see how the bishop too captures. We've already seen how the bishop captures, but these are just additional examples that will help to refine our knowledge of capturing with the pieces. So yeah, remember that bishop moves in an X shape. So it says capture the black knight. So if we look at the board, which black knight is there? This one here. And if we see the bishop, we can see that diagonal. If we put our line towards, you can see that line. So you just simply click on your bishop and you capture the knight on F, the square. Let's continue. So it says capture the white bishop. So this is the white bishop that we can capture. This is our bishop there. We can see both bishops are facing themselves on the diagonal. So we simply press the bishop and we capture it. Alright, so it says capture the white pawn. So where is the white pawn that we can capture? Remember that we are dealing with bishops here. So here we have to look for the black bishop actually. And that means since the white pawn here is on a light square, we look for our bishop on a light square, which is here. And we'll simply take the white pawn on g2. Continue. Okay, so we need to use our bishop to capture this black pawn. So we remember again that whenever there's a piece in front of the path that the bishop is on, that bishop cannot jump over a piece. You cannot jump over a piece. We remember that in the previous lessons. So we need to find a way to give the bishop, to open up that diagonal so the bishop can be able to capture that pawn. And the only way to do that is to move the pawn. So kind of like telling the pawn, go forward, go forward. So move the pawn forward and use our bishop to capture the pawn. Very good. Okay, so here you can see the black pawn is about to get promoted to a queen. We don't want that. So we need to find a way to use the bishop to block any of those, to have control over this particular square. Remember that the bishop can move in long range. So what that means is that to get towards holding this square, we need to put our bishop on either this square here or to come and hold this square here. So we can bring the bishop here, which is good. Alright, so we've completed that lesson. So we've seen how the bishop moves, how it captures too as well. So whenever you are playing, you don't make mistake with your bishops in terms of how you are moving either the light square bishop or the dark square bishop. So here we're also going to see additional examples of how the rook can capture. Okay, capture the black rook. Okay, so here it says we should capture the black pawn. So which black pawn can the rook? Remember, in this particular lesson, we are dealing with the rooks. So we are going to be using the rooks to capture. So the only rook that can capture, the white rook that can capture a black pawn is this one here. We don't forget that the rook moves in an addition symbol along the squares, in a plus shape basically. So here we simply click on the pawn and we capture we simply click on the rook and capture the pawn. Sorry. So continue. Okay, so here we need to capture the black pawns with the rook, and we are going to be moving the rook along the squares in a plus manner. So here, remember that the rook can move far range, so it's not limited to just one square at a time like the king. So here we move the rooks here to capture this pawn, and capture the last pawn. Very good. If you got that correctly, you can clap for yourself. Alright, so here it says we need to capture the black queen. Okay, so we simply click on our rook. Our rook is the only piece that can capture the queen, so we simply capture the queen. Right, so we need to capture the black pawn, and yeah, we need to use our rook. So remember, the rook can move in the far range, so simply swing it to the side, swing it to the 7th, and capture the black pawn. That's the fastest way to do it. Alright, so see now the rook captures too as well. Now let us go to the next piece. So here we just want to see how we capture with the king. So in this particular lesson, we're dealing with king, capturing pieces. And remember that the king can move one square at a time to any of the squares that are close to it. So either in a diagonal plus, in a diagonal a plus form. So here we simply capture the bishop towards the king's diagonal. Continue. So here we need to capture all the white pawns with our king. So we'll need to take the king towards that area where the pawns are. That's the only way we can get to capture them. So we move the king closer, get the king closer, capture the first pawn, and take the second pawn. Let's continue. So here we need to capture the white bishop with our king basically. The bishop is in front of the king, so simply capture the bishop. Also, one more important thing for us to remember is that you cannot capture the king basically cannot capture another piece that is protected. I think we'll also see some example here too as well. So whenever a piece is protected, the king cannot capture it. Because remember that the king is very important. So we don't want to subject it to loss basically, as compared to the other pieces that can capture even protected pieces. So simply move our king, take the first pawn, capture the second pawn. Alright. So this is the last exercise. So we need to take our king closer to the area where that pawn is, so we can be able to capture the pawn. Capture the pawn. Very good. Very good, very good. Let's continue. Okay, so this lesson we will be dealing with the queens. So we need to use the queen to capture all the pawns. So we are going to be using the queen to capture pieces. Remember that these lessons are geared towards you trying to strengthen your knowledge of how to use pieces to capture other pieces. So here we'll be dealing with the queen. So here we'll take the first pawn, capture the second pawn. Remember that the queen can move like the rook, can move like the king, can move like the pawn, it can move like the bishop too as well. The only piece it can't move like is the knight. So get it closer here, capture the pawn, bring it closer to where the other pawn is, and we'll capture the last pawn. Very good. Very good. Alright, so here we need to capture the black queen. And we'll look at the position, which of our pieces are queen basically. And you can see that diagonal towards facing the other black queen along that diagonal. So we'll simply click on our queen and take the black queen. Alright, very good. So here we need to capture the black pawn. Where's the black pawn? Here you can see that the queen is looking at the black pawn along that its diagonal. So simply click on the queen and capture the black pawn, attacking black's king. Alright. So here it says capture the bishop, black bishop with the queen. Okay, so we need to click on our queen, capture the black bishop here. Alright. So let's continue. So here so we need to capture the white bishop. Where's the white bishop? You can see the queens facing the white bishop alongside that diagonal. So simply click on our queen and take the bishop on g2. Alright, let's continue. Alright, so we've seen how the queen can capture pieces too as well, based on how it moves. So for instance, if you have your opponent's pieces in a square where your queen can move to, and if that piece is not protected, you can simply just capture the piece. Right, let's continue. So here we'll be looking at the knight as well. Most times the knight is the one where players usually, especially at the start, struggle a bit to get. But using the knowledge that we've talked about initially with the L or T idea, where you count two squares in a plus form, then you move either to the left or right, L or T, forming an L or a T. So here we are going to move the knight two squares to the right, and to form our L or T, we can see L or T. So we're going to capture this pawn here, two squares to the right again, L or T. So we'll capture this one here, two squares forward, L or T. So we are going to capture the pawn to this side, two squares to the left, L or T. So we're going to capture this pawn here, two squares to the left again, L or T. We're going to capture this one here, and two squares down, L or T, any one of them. So we're going to capture this one. Alright. So here it says we should capture the white bishop. Remember again, two squares to the left, L or T. We are simply going to capture this bishop. Okay. So here we are going to capture the black pawn with a knight. Where's the black pawn that can be captured? There's this one here. We're going to form two squares to the left, L or T again. We're going to take the pawn here. Okay, good. So here we said we need to capture the queen. So remember again, whenever we are moving the knights two squares, we're always counting two squares in a plus form, addition symbol, L moving in an L or T shape. So we're going to count two squares to the right, L or T, and we're going to capture the queen. Right, very good. Very good, very good. I hope by now a lot of you will be able to move the knight already. So here we need to form the same thing again. 2 squares forward, LOT. We take the bishop, 2 squares forward, LOT. Take this pawn here. 2 squares to the right, LOT, LOT. And we capture the pawn here. 2 squares to our right again, LOT, and we capture the bishop. Alright, very good. Very good, very good. Alright, so let's go on to the next one. Alright, I think we are done with that one, so let's see. So now we've seen how all the old pieces can capture, from the king to the pawn to the knight to the bishop to the queen to the rook too as well. See how each and every one of all these pieces can capture, another of your opponent's piece whenever there are those pieces in front of, there are squares where they can move to. So next up, we'll look at the value of the pieces. So each of the piece, I'm sure by now a lot of you will be aware of that the king is the most important piece. I will know that, okay, we lose our king, the whole game is lost. So that alone tells us that the king is the most important piece. That it's going to have a lot of value compared to the other pieces. So, but how about the other pieces? So we're going to see how their relative values, how that is shared between the other pieces too as well. So first up here we have the king. Yeah, the king. We know that the king is the most important piece. There's no point per se attached to it because we know that the king is the most important piece on the chessboard. Alright, let's continue. So yeah, so it says here the king's value is unlimited, like I said before, because there's no point attached. You can't, it's priceless basically. The king is priceless. So because of that, its value is unlimited, because if you can be up 2 queens, 3 queens, 5 queens, but if your king gets checkmated, the game is lost and you're going to lose the game. So that ensures that we need to protect our king at all times. So it says here, how can you save an attacked king? So in earlier examples, we saw whenever the king was being attacked, especially the one where the rook was attacking the king, and we needed to use the bishop to capture the rook to protect the king. So whenever the king is attacked, we always need to move. We are forced to protect the king by either moving the king away or capturing that piece that is threatening the king. So here you cannot ignore the threat. So we know ignoring the threat is not the right answer. You can't avoid the threat, then you can't do nothing as well. We always need to act. Then that tells us that capturing the threat is the right answer. So click on capture the threat. Yeah, very good. So we'll continue. So here it says, what should black do here? We can see this particular queen. Black can capture the queen for free. There's nothing protecting the queen. But at the same time, we also see that if black captures this queen, white can use his rook to capture the black pawn. And we are going to have what we call a checkmate. A checkmate, because black's king will be under attack and the king will not be able to move away. He will also not be able to capture the white rook on this square here that is being attacked. So whenever we have such moments, we know that, okay, checkmate means the game has ended already, because if you're not able to capture the attacking piece that is attacking the king, and king is also not able to move to any of the squares to run away, basically, that is a checkmate. So yeah, that tells us that capturing this queen is not good. So we need to find, so we know capturing the queen is, we rule that out. Capturing the knight, how about capturing the knight? If we capture this knight with our queen and the queen captures back, we take away the threat of checkmate. The threat of checkmate is much more important to avoid and to prevent than the loss of a piece. So here we know that we need to capture the knight. Alright, very good. So it says here, how valuable is the king? We know 10 points is not correct, 100 points is not correct, 12 points is not correct, infinite. King it doesn't have a price, so it's infinite. Here we check. Alright, continue. So here it says we need to save the black king. So we can see here that the black king is under a check because the white queen, we can see it's in the same line as the white queen. So it tells us that the white queen is attacking the black king. That is a check. so we need to move the black king away. So here we can't capture the white queen, so the only place the black king can move to is to the right side. That's the only square available to it. So we simply move the king towards that square. Alright, very good. So yeah, we've completed that lesson. Let's move to the next lesson now. So here it says the queen is worth 9 points. So that's the relative value in terms of numerical value that is attached to the queen. So we know that the queen has the highest points available now, as opposed to the king that doesn't have a point attached to it. So the queen is worth 9 points, 9 whole points. So the whole idea of the value of the pieces is meant to, put into you the knowledge that whenever you are playing, you simply don't want to exchange a piece that has more value for a piece that has less value. It's just like, for instance, if I have $100 and you have $10, and you're trying to collect my $100, we know that the $100 has more value than $10. So it's in terms of the trade of value, you know that okay, you will be taking more trade, and if I take your $10, I'll be losing. So it's the same thing with the pieces too as well. Whenever you are exchanging pieces, you always want to be aware of the value that you're taking and the value that you're getting, because in chess the whole objective is centered around you trying to win. You trying to checkmate your opponent's king, and you do that by actually trying to. So chess is kind of like a zero-sum game basically. If you win, your opponent loses. All right, so let's continue. Here says queen capture bishop, good. So we know that. So what it's asking basically is that it's the white queen capturing the black bishop. Is that a good choice to make? So we know here that we can capture it, but we can see here that black's queen is protecting the bishop, and this is worth 9 points. We haven't seen this one yet, but the bishop is actually worth 3 points. So if you give 9 points, if you take this, you allow black to capture it back, and you give 9 points to your opponent. And you are taking 3 points in return. Is that a good trade of value? No. 3 points to 9 points, too much. So black will be doing very fine. So we know that queen captures bishop is not a good choice. So we'll simply say no. Continue. So it says here white queen is attacked. Do something. So we can see here that white queen is being attacked by the bishop. You can see along that diagonal, and we know that from experience that the queen is worth 9 points and the bishop is worth 3 points. So we don't want to give our opponent 9 points and we're collecting 3 points. That's disadvantageous for us. So we need to move our queen away. And where can we move our queen away? We can't bring it here. It's still going to be along that diagonal. So we need to place it in a safer square. We can place it here, we can place it here, we can place it here. These are safe squares that are not going to be attacked by the bishop. And we cannot capture the bishop, because remember that if we capture the bishop, the knight can move in a plus shape. And so the knight is protecting the bishop. So if you use your queen to capture the bishop, the knight captures the queen back. So simply take the queen back in a safer square. Alright, let's continue. So help white acquire more value. So here we see that the bishop on this square is being protected by the queen, by the black queen. At the same time, the black bishop is attacking white's queen on f3. But if we look closely, we'll also see that there is a white bishop behind the white queen. So that gives us more firepower. So that means there are 2 attackers on this diagonal. You can see the queen and the bishop. So we have 2 attackers on that diagonal. We have this bishop on the diagonal, but its only protector is the black queen on c8. So that tells us that if you have one defender and 2 attackers, 2 attackers should trounce one defender. So that tells us that even if we capture this bishop, when the queen captures our queen back, the bishop will be able to capture the queen immediately. And we'll see here that after those exchanges, we are going to be left with 2 pieces. So we've already captured one of black's pieces. So that tells us that white has more value. We captured 3 points. We've gained 3 points. All right, let's continue. So how do you acquire value here as white? It's okay, still the same exercise. So simply capture the bishop, queen captures back, and we capture back with our queen, our bishop rather. All right. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so it says here the rook. So the rook is worth 5 points. Now after the queen, the rook is the other piece that has the highest points. And it's worth 5 points. 5 points, like my finger, 5. So if rook captures bishop, good. Is it a good move to make? Here that we can see that the queen is protecting the bishop on that, on the horizontal squares to the left side, and the pawn also is protecting the bishop. So we know that if we use our rook to capture the bishop, the rook is going to get captured back, and that's not a good trade of value because we've given 5 points and we are capturing 3 points. So we know that black is going to be doing very well. So we say no here. It's not a good move. So let's continue. So which black piece attacks a big white piece here? Alright, so let's see. So we have the rook here. We can see, is there any black piece attacking it? Are there any black pieces next to it? No. So we want to look far range. And if there are any black pieces on the far range that is attacking it, we can see here that the only piece on the far range that is attacking the rook is the bishop along that diagonal. So we can see here that the bishop is facing the rook along that diagonal. So the bishop is threatening to capture the rook. If we do nothing here, the bishop is simply going to capture the white rook. And that is 3.5 points. Remember that we don't want to give our opponent the advantage. So here we know that it's the bishop. So we simply click on the bishop. That's correct. Let's continue. So is rook captured knight good? So you know that you can't capture your own piece. That's not possible. No, that means this will be talking about the black rook. Sorry. So if we use our black rook to capture the white knight, would that be good? So recall again that the knight is being protected by the rook because it's in the squares, along the squares where the rook can move to. So if we know that if you use your black rook to capture this knight, the white rook is simply going to capture your rook back, which that exchange, the knight is worth 3 points. And you're giving up 5 points for 3 points. So that tells us that you've lost the trade there. You've given white more points, and that's not good basically. So we say here rook capture knight good. No, it's not a good move. So let's continue. So which white piece has more value here? It's the king. Remember that the king is the piece that has the most value. Select the king. Okay, so let's continue. Lesson completed. Okay, so the bishop is worth 3 points. As I said earlier, the bishop, we've seen the queen 9 points, the rook 5 points, and now the king also unlimited. Then the bishop 3 points. So let's continue. So it says, would bishop capture black pawn be a good move? So bishop here capturing the black pawn. Remember that the pawn is worth 1 point. So if you use your bishop to capture this black pawn here, you can see that the black pawn at the back is protecting the pawn there. So you know that since it's defending this pawn, if you are going to be using your bishop to capture that pawn, the pawn is going to take your bishop back. And that is not a good trade of value. You are giving 3 points for 1 point. It's like giving $3 and taking $1. So that's not good for you. It's not good for you. So we say no. The bishop capture pawn good. No. Alright, let's continue. So what is attacking the black bishop? Okay, we know that it's the white pawn. We can see here that the white pawn is threatening to capture the black bishop to his diagonal. So we say the pawn. Alright, so let's continue. So it says here, find the best move for black. So let us look around. You can see here what's the best move we can make here. We can see here that this bishop is threatening to do something along that diagonal. We can see here that there's a rook at the far end of that diagonal, and the bishop can capture that rook, and there's nothing protecting the rook again. So that tells us that we are even taking it for free at no cost. So simply use the bishop to capture the rook. Alright, let's continue. Which of black pieces has the most value? So let us see here. Which of black pieces has the most value? So we know it's the king. It's the king that has the most value here. Although white is a pawn down, white has lesser pawns than black, 2-1. So, but the king is still the most valuable piece. So we'll simply select the king. Okay, which side has the most value here? So this is an interesting position, because if we look at the configuration of the pieces on the board, we can tell that white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 officers. White has 5 officers, while black has 1, 2, 3, 4 officers. Black has 4 officers. But the subtle difference is that black has extra pawns compared to white. So here we know that white has 3 pawns, black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns to 3. And which officer is black missing? Black has lost a knight, but we know that, okay, he has probably exchanged knight, managed to exchange knight for 3 points, for 3 pawns, So it seems equal, but let us see which side has the most value. So 1, 2, 3, since they are 1 point each, so 3 points for the pawn, 5 points for the rook, making 8, plus this rook, that is 13. 8, 13. The queen is 9 points, so that gives us 21. No, 22, sorry. 22. Then plus the bishop, that is 25. Plus the knight, that is 28. So we know white has 28 points. Then for the black pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 plus 10, that is 16. 16 plus the bishop, 3 points, that is 19. 19 plus the queen, 9 points, that is 28. So we know, okay, no side has the most value, so it's in none. It's equal. 28 to 28 points. It's equal. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so yeah, we've seen the knight is worth 3 points, as we saw earlier. So his knight captures pawn, good. So we see here that black's knight is defending the black pawn. So remember, 2 squares to the left, L of T. So you see that it is defending the black pawn. It's protecting the black pawn. So if you are going to be using your knight to capture that pawn, you'll be giving your opponent a free piece. You are taking a pawn which is worth 1 point. You are giving your knight which is worth 3 points. So that is not a good trade of value. So know that it is not a good move. So simply select no, check, continue. So it says, what should white do here? So we can see that the bishop, the white knight is in the squares of the bishop. So that tells us that if it were black to play here, black is simply going to capture the white knight. So we need to move the knight away, so black won't capture it for free. So it says here our options here. Can we capture the bishop? No, we can't. Can we move king? If we move our king, it's simply going to take the bishop, the knight, sorry. So that is not good for white. So we need to move the knight away. So where do we move the knight to? Okay, we select move knight. Check, continue. Which side has the most value here? Okay, so let us see what's the difference to know which side has the most value. So we can see here a pawn for a pawn, king for a king, knight for knight, pawn for pawn, pawn for pawn. So white has an extra pawn, so we know that white has the most value here. So simply select white, continue. Capture the most valuable white piece. Which piece is most valuable? I mean, you guys can pause the video and select which piece is the most valuable piece. So remember that the bishop is worth 3 points and the rook is worth 5 points. So the rook is more valuable, so we are going to capture the rook. All right. let's continue. So yeah, remember that the pawn is worth 1 point, 1 point. So let's continue. It's the least piece with the lesser point, because we know that there are more pawns compared to the officers on the board. So the pawn is worth 1 point as compared to the other pieces that are worth 3 points, 5 points, 9 points. So would pawn capture bishop be a good trade of value? It seems like so say yes, because if you capture this, white seems to be doing very well, so he needs to capture the bishop. If he doesn't capture the bishop, it allows black to have an extra officer, which is not good for white. So we'll simply select yes, continue. Who has the most piece value here? So this particular position is a very interesting one, because we can see here that both sides, white and black, they have equal pawns, but there's a subtle difference here, and that is the black pawn is much closer to the promotion square as opposed to the white pawn. And remember that a pawn that is like when it gets promoted, it can get promoted to a queen. So that means that this black pawn we are seeing here can become a queen very soon, and that would be disadvantageous for white. So it's not good for white, and we know this as it's called a passed pawn in chess. So whenever the pawn is moving along the squares, that there are no pawns on that same squares, so we know it as a passed pawn, a pawn that is about to get promoted. So it's a very dangerous pawn. It's much valuable than a pawn that is not closer to its promotion square. So here black actually has most piece value. So simply select black and continue. Okay, so we need to match the correct pairs. So we are trying to match the pieces with its corresponding value. So we know that the queen is worth 9 points, so select queen, select 9. The rook is worth 5 points, so select rook 5. The knight is worth 3 points, so select knight 3. And the pawn is worth 1 point, so we're going to select pawn to 1. Alright, very good, very good. Very good. Alright, the chessboard has how many pawns? Let's see. Remember that all the pawns are on the second row. For both white and black, 8 pawns each. So we know that 16 pawns in total. Okay, 16. Continue. All right, that's good. Okay, I'm sure by now a lot of you would have known how the relative value of all the pieces are, from the king being unlimited, to the queen worth 9 points, to the rook 5 points, to the bishop and knight worth 3 points each, to the pawn being worth 1 point. So whenever you are playing, you always want to know when to make the right exchanges, not to give your opponent a bigger piece and you taking less. Chess is not where when you are playing a chess game, it's not where you are doing you are gifting your opponent piece. When you gift your opponent a free piece, or you trade lesser value, give your opponent more value, you're at a loss there. You're at a loss, because chess is kind of like a zero-sum game where your win is equal to your opponent's loss. Alright, so we've seen the value of the pieces, we've seen how the old piece is shared amongst all. So let's quickly look at the objective of the game. So we know the major objective of chess is to checkmate your opponent's king. When you checkmate your opponent's king, you win the game, because the king is the most important piece on the chessboard. So whenever you are playing, that's why castling was invented, to be able to safeguard the king. Whenever you are playing, you always want to ensure that your king is very safe. Once you notice your opponent's pieces are coming into your territory, that you should be watchful of those pieces, because if you are not careful, they are going to do a bit of damage to your territory, or to your king mostly. So the main goal of chess is to checkmate, as we said earlier. So let us see some examples of a checkmate. So here it says checkmate the white king here. And we can see here that the white king is deep into black's territory. We don't know how it got here, but you know, whichever way it got here is not going back. So how can we checkmate the white king here? Obviously, we need to be attacking the white king. And which piece can attack the white king? We can see here that the queen can attack the white king because it's closer. The knight too can also attack the white king. If it goes, you know, remember to squares to the right, LOT can come here and be attacking the white king. The pawn too can also attack the white king. But which one will be able to deliver a checkmate? So we know that whenever we are attacking the king, and the king is not able to move to any square, it can't move, and the piece that is attacking it cannot be captured too as well. We know that as a checkmate. So we know that if we move our knight here, the king is going to sidestep towards the right. So that's not a checkmate. If we use our pawn to attack the king can come up. It's not a checkmate either, or it can capture the pawn too. It's not a checkmate. So you see here that if our queen too can also capture the pawn, we can drop our queen here, but is it a checkmate? The king will be able to capture the queen, so that is not good. So we need to capture this pawn here. So we see that when we capture the pawn here, the king is attacked and it can't come to this square because the knight is attacking that square. So this is a checkmate. Right guys, so we are going to stop the video here. In subsequent videos we'll look at the other parts, you know, go fully into the objectives of the game, weaknesses and strengths, a very core topic as well. So in the meantime, head on over to, you know, www.ladderchess.com and, you know, keep learning, keep getting stronger. To see again, you can drop your comments, let me know what you think of ladder, you know, and keep getting better at chess. Thank you.